your computer muted if you're not actively speaking, just so we don't get any background noise, just in case. On the lower bar, you'll see the participants section. You'll be able to see who's in the chat there. I don't believe we'll have the raise your hand function available. So the best way to get our attention or ask a question is to use the chat function, also on the bottom of the screen. You can also post reactions like clapping or a thumbs up. And then one important thing is that we're going to have a slideshow playing for most of the presentation. So in order to see the speaker as well, you'll notice that you can see us in the right-hand side right now. You're going to want to look at the black bar above our faces, and the second option from the left says show small active speaker video. If you click on that, you'll see one speaker, and then you can drag from the lower left or lower right-hand corner to make that speaker bigger. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. You can unmute yourself and ask anything.
And with that, we'd like to get started. Thank you all for joining. And I'd like to introduce Tree People's CEO, Cindy Montañez. Cindy.
Okay, well, good morning to everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces. So welcome again. Good morning. First of all, I hope you're staying well during this pandemic. Thank you all for joining and spending time with us today. We're being joined by joined by other Tree People supporters and just wonderful partners, such as Boeing. I see Vanessa Smith, who's joining us this morning. Boeing, for example, has been a partner of Tree People for over 40 years, and they have been critical to our abilities as Tree People to expand on our fire restoration efforts. Several board members who are with us, who give generously of their time, their talents and resources. And there's no doubt Tree People has, I think, the best board in town. And we thank you to all the board members for all that you do and give to Tree People. And you'll have the opportunity to meet some incredible Tree People team members who keep the most wonderful community environmental organizations strong. So we're grateful to you for your support. You have helped keep Tree People strong and resilient during these it's been a challenging year, as we all know. Today, we're going to talk about fires. Because of your support, we've been able to plant trees all over neighborhoods in Los Angeles County. We are going to be moving into Riverside County as well. We're planting from the National Forest to the Santa Monica Mountains to urban communities, especially in those communities that don't have a lot of trees. But around wildfires, which is the focus today, Tree People has developed a proven model to show how we can help with making communities more fire resilient. And then especially our restoration efforts have been among the most cutting edge and successful restoration efforts that are happening anywhere in the Angeles National Forest or the Santa Monicas. I have to say this topic is very personal for me, as it is, I think, for several people on the call today. I live, like many of you, in the Santa Monica Mountains. I have a home up in Topanga, an area that, as we all know, is very prone to fires. But it's a community that has been a model thanks to a person like Beth Burnham, who's on our board, a community that's been a model for how we can create fire-safe communities. You will be hearing from Beth today. So this is why we wanted to have this conversation with you. Tree People does a lot of work, but we want to work with you to see what we can do to create more fire-safe communities throughout the Santa Monica Mountains and just throughout the region. And we have tools to help you do this. So today you're going to be hearing from our wonderful team members, Alyssa Walker, who is just dynamic and just incredible, and she heads up our Angeles Restoration, or is one of the coordinators in our Angeles Restoration program. She's going to share a lot of what our team is doing in the Angeles National Forest, restoration and fire prevention work that we have been able to really expand and deepen again because of support from Boeing, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, our partners at the U.S. Forest Service, and others. You're also going to be hearing from Kevin Gaston, who is our Deputy Director of our Land Trust. We just recently acquired, as Tree People, a land trust last November. So it's been exactly a year since we acquired a land trust that owns and manages about 3,000 acres in the Santa Monica Mountains. Kevin is our Deputy Director there, and truly one of the leading minds on what we can do to create like more fire safe neighborhoods. We'll also be hearing from our incredible board member, Beth Burnham, who, as I mentioned earlier, is a statewide leader in what communities can do and to protect themselves from this growing threat of fires. In addition to being our board member at Tree People, Beth is also co-president and founding member of the North Topanga Canyon Fire Safe Council. Tree People honored her in 2019. So just last year at our annual Harvest Moon dinner, for her commitment to Tree People and her statewide leadership to establish fire safe councils throughout the state of California. So as I said, this work is critical to what we do at Tree People. It's critical for us. We are located, as many of you know, right there in the heart of the Santa Monicas on Coldwater Canyon and Mulholland. It's critical for our neighbors, many of you who are on this call, and it's critical just for communities throughout. And we're just grateful for this opportunity to be with you today, this morning, and share this time with you. So I'd like to introduce you to Alyssa Walker, who's going to kick off telling you about the restoration work that we're doing in the Angeles National Forest.
Awesome. So, hello. My name is Alyssa Walker, and I'm one of the coordinators out there in the Angeles. Today, we're going to be diving into a few things. So I'm going to talk to you guys about Santa Monica Mountains as well, just so you guys get a well-rounded idea of what we're doing in our restoration program and how it helps mitigate and spread the slow of wildfire. Next slide. Yeah, awesome. So check it out. This is an image inside our nursery at Coldwater Canyon Park, which is like our Tree People headquarters, as many of you probably know. But check it out. These three people, at this point, we're all biological science interns. One of them is now a staff member. Still, we're working under COVID conditions. As you can see, everybody's got a mask on, and we're following some strict safety guidelines in order to do so. But the nursery is able to pump out thousands of native plants every year. And you can see some are being potted up right now. The cool thing about the nursery is it's one of very few, I believe it's only two in Southern California, that operate under strict Phytophthora-free protocols. So for anyone who's not familiar, Phytophthora is a pathogen that causes root rot in plants. And it's really not as prevalent yet in Southern California, but in order to keep it that way, we do operate under some strict protocols that involve bleaching everything that we work with that's going to be in contact with our plant material, as well as using pasteurized soil. So it's a process. But Jack trains up some biological science interns. As you can see here, they get more information on just how to grow native plants and what restoration looks like. So we have a nice system. Next slide. So this is an image of an area out in Topanga Canyon, actually. We're partnered with the Resource Conservation District out there. And this spot has been getting a good amount of work over the last few years. But as you can see here, there's a fair amount of what we call invasive species. I'm sure plenty of you are very familiar with that terminology. But those guys, a lot of the invasive species we see, they dry during the summer. And that's what honestly helps fire spread really quickly. So ideally, we want to get out there and remove those invasive species because native plants are much better adapted to deal with fire, and they ignite less prevalently, as well as they retain moisture. And we'll get into that more in a minute, but part of the goal here is to remove invasive species. And the reason this spot and this particular image has so much invasion is because the funding was actually disrupted for this program. So it's hard to get out there if we can't make it happen with the funding for different projects. But it's interesting, as you can see here, everybody, again, working in masks. So like I said, we've been operating under COVID, but it's been a bit challenging, right? Up to 8-hour days with a mask on in all the heat and all the cold now coming in. So our bodies adapt, but luckily we have a pretty great set of staff and volunteers who are willing to go the distance with the mask in restoration efforts. So yeah, this spot's on Chumash land, and it's exciting that we've been able to get back out there recently. But another thing I want to mention real quick about the nursery and our nursery manager, Jack Smith's our manager of the nursery, and he has, I think, 40 Engelmann oak saplings that are ready for homes. So if anyone is interested, just get in touch with us about that after this meeting, and we can set you up with that. But it's a native California species, and it's also considered a rare species. So kind of special, fun information. Okay, next slide. So you guys just got a touch of the nursery, Santa Monica Mountains. Now we're gonna dive into the Angeles. So I just wanted you to get a landscape shot of how beautiful it is out there. I can't tell you how grateful I am for my job. I love my job, but take a look at this image. It's hard to see, but there's about 10 little floating hard hats out there. If you can spot them, you win the prize. There's no prize, but there's people out there working. So we get groups of volunteers out there, and we try to plant within a weekend. Typically they're overnight events, and we try to plant at least a couple thousand seedlings at a time. So part of why we do this, it's a higher elevation location than our other spots in the Angeles, as well as Santa Monica Mountains. So what's been interesting about these locations is, as climate change has progressed, we see a warming trend. The climatic window required for these conifer seedlings to naturally regenerate has been shortened dramatically. So when you have wildfire roll through, and then you have the effects of climate change on top of that, which, by the way, wildfire and climate change, very connected. But you have like the warming trend post-wildfire or around the time, you're gonna see that those natural regeneration seedlings, it's far less successful. So part of what's cool is we try to get out there and reforest areas that might be struggling in those mid-range elevation locations, as well as higher elevation locations. So it's an interesting project. Thousands of trees in the ground. We try to care for them after, hopefully ensure some success. So next slide. You guys are gonna get to check out what it looks like. It's a much more efficient process than what we can do in lower elevation locations, because as you can see here, this gal's got, one of our volunteers has a planting bar laying on the ground there. All we do is pop the planting bar in the ground, open up the earth, and you can pop the seedling in the ground. So you can get, that's how we're able to get so much done in a short amount of time. As this day, it must not have been that cold, but some days we're doing it in this fresh snow. So it's a fun time. Next slide is just gonna show you one more action shot of a volunteer. But as you can see, we're lucky, it's pretty beautiful out there. So next slide, we'll dive into, this is kind of, I wanted to show you guys this just so you can see the difference in how plant communities respond to fire and their fire frequency presently compared to pre-Euro-American settlement. So there's kind of a lot going on here, but I'm going to try to break it down simply. If you see that middle section that says HRV, that's going to be where these plant communities fell in their fire frequency pre-settlement. And then the distinction with these arrows is going to show you where we've diverged from pre-settlement conditions. So what we saw in the past with conifer forests was naturally fire would occur every maybe 20 years or so on average. And mostly that was just due to weather systems bringing in fire. So what causes fire naturally is mostly lightning in these areas. And what ended up happening from about 1910 to 1970, the Forest Service, like the name of the game was suppression. And understandably, because there was a lot of fear behind wildfire at the time. And what ended up happening there was with suppression in conifer forests, we saw fuel buildup that would not typically have occurred had we not been suppressing fire. And then around 1970s, the Forest Service decided to start doing what they call managed wildfire. So when a natural wildfire would break out, They would actually, if it was under safe conditions, they would let it burn. And what's nice about that is it does, you know, lighten up some of that fuel load that we see build up. But I think in that time period from the 1910 to 1970, there may have been a bit too much buildup. So that's just something to note about conifer forests, but they do strongly differ from chaparral. So I want to make sure, if you can see here on this slide, the enhanced, like chaparral fire regimes and fire frequency has enhanced compared to where it once was. So we're seeing more frequent fire. So in chaparral, you're not typically going to see fire more than every 60 years on average. Sometimes it's up to 100, 120 years. What we're seeing today is far more frequent fire in those ecosystems than desired. So that, and Kevin will get into this more later, but as we see more frequent fire in those spaces, it definitely threatens the natural functioning of that ecosystem. So yeah, this is kind of a nice way to break it down. So I think the most important piece of this is just to be sure we're careful about generalizations about managing wildfire, because in some cases, controlled burns may be beneficial, like in a conifer forest, but in a chaparral ecosystem, controlled burns could actually be more detrimental than positive. So it's just something to keep in mind. And with climate change, that's another thing we have to consider. We're in 2020, not 1970. So controlled burns are something to kind of approach delicately in some conditions. Awesome. So next slide. So this is one of my favorite sites because I'm there almost all the time. Every weekend we're out here. This is a spot in the Castaic Santa Clarita zone, and it's out there in a piece of the Angeles right behind Santa Clarita. But as you can see here, this is one of our chaparral restorations. The left-hand picture is before. So that was, I believe, closer to 2018, maybe early 2019. And on the right-hand side, we have what it looks like in a very short amount of time. We see like dramatic just success of the plants that are out there. What's so special about this is before we planted, this area was just a mustard monocrop. Mustard, as many of you are probably familiar, is one of the most harmful invasive species. So there was a few others definitely, but mustard was one of the most impacted in this area. And prevalent. So we were able to clear the mustard, and on the right-hand side, that's like the best case scenario. You can see there's a diversity of native plants, and they're all doing very well in a short amount of time. So the special thing about chaparral is you have native plants that are well adapted to fire. So they're not supposed to burn all that often, but when they do, a really serious fire can roll through and they will bounce back. So part of why that is they retain moisture really efficiently. And also they have like thick, what we call sclerophilous leaves, most of them. So it's a fancy biological term, but what it means is it's a thick, dense leaf, right? And that also helps from things wanting to nibble on native plants. So it helps with herbivory as well as retaining moisture. So all the cool things about that, it's going to help prevent wildfire from spreading quickly. And when it does, they can bounce back because they have very prolific root system underground. So awesome. If you want to show the next slide, you guys will get kind of a nice image of, let's see here, on that next slide, if you guys are ready to switch it, you can see, do you want to switch to the next slide? Awesome. So this is a nice image example of how quickly and well native plants are going to re-sprout after a wildfire. So in chaparral ecosystems. So this was, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the lake fire, but the lake fire just rolled through the Castaic area around June or July, I believe. And this photo was just taken about a month ago. So in a very short amount of time, you can see how dramatic the burn was. This was an established chaparral ecosystem, and it was taken down completely here. And yet you can already tell this is Yerba Santa in the foreground, and in the background, there's a couple chamise. They're resprouting really quickly from that root burl. So that's very often and classic of what you'll see in chaparral ecosystems because of that prolific root system. So this image was actually taken on our way to an oak acorn collection that we've been working on, because that's one more project we've got going in the Angeles. We're working on an oak propagation. Our goal is about 3,500 acorns collected and then planted out in these different locations throughout the Castaic Range. And what's so special about oaks is they're also extremely well adapted for fire. So really thick bark, again, those thick, dense sclerophyllous leaves. So they don't ignite quickly or well, which is awesome. And then when they do, you'll see this same thing where they'll resprout from the root burl at the bottom, but you'll also see resprouts throughout the entire trunk system. So oaks are a very special species. So it's exciting that we're able to jump into this propagation project. I think just to debunk one common chaparral myth is that we need, maybe it's not necessarily chaparral, but Southern California fire myth, is that we need fire to propagate and let some native seed germinate. But in reality, in chaparral ecosystems especially, the percentage of plants that require fire to germinate their seed is actually pretty small. So that's just something to keep in mind. Most things don't require fire for seed germination. So with that all being said, I want to introduce Kevin. He's going to dive more into chaparral adaptation and what happens if there's too much fire, as well as defensible space and how to make your home more defensible.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Alyssa, and thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Kevin Gaston. I'm the Deputy Director of Mountains Restoration Trust, or MRT. As Cindy mentioned, it has now been just over a year that Tree People took leadership of MRT. This last year, despite its hiccups, has been fruitful. We've been integrating our staff, our programming, and we'll do so to an even greater degree in 2021. So very exciting news ahead for everybody. Just gonna touch on a few things Alyssa said, but really, as she mentioned, dive into the chaparral piece. This beautiful image you can see, this is taken at a trailhead at our Cold Creek Preserve, which I, of course, encourage everyone to visit. In addition to some woodland in the foreground, the majority of what you're looking at is just classic mixed chaparral environment. With this, you get your densely vegetated, close campy evergreen shrubland. She mentioned the sclerophyllous leaf type that really helps retain the moisture through the long dry summer. What's really important to note about chaparral is it's unique to California, but extremely dominant within the state, particularly for areas that we call the urban wildland interface. So if you own land in the San Joaquin Mountains or the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, chances are that open space contains, or at least historically contained, chaparral communities, and we'll touch on that in a bit. The main takeaway I want you to have today is that fire behaves radically different in chaparral than it does in a traditional coniferous forest. So next slide, please. This map was put together by the National Park Service and shows something called the fire return interval. So essentially, how often does any given point on the landscape burn on average? So as you can see, as you get down into the warmer colors of the color rank, you're starting to see down near Pepperdine and PCH, that land burns on average once every 9 years, which is a significant departure from its historical average. We have some of the lowest lightning strike rates in the country, yet we're seeing these fire intervals just rapidly increase. So two big things I want to point out is that these fires are almost always caused by humans, be it a dragging chain on the freeway, a utility line, or a campfire. Humans are the cause of this, which in my mind really provides an opportunity. If we continue to educate people about fire conditions, we can start to tamper this issue a bit. The second thing to note is that most wildfires go unnoticed. They're not going to make headlines. The fire department responds quickly, really just going to be a few locals that know what happened. The really large catastrophic fires, such as the Thomas Fire, which I had to evacuate from, the Woolsey Fire, even going back to the 2007 firestorm, these all occurred and were so catastrophic because of Santa Ana wind conditions. So these dry, gusty winds coming in from the northeast really are the main driver and change the fire behavior that we witness. So rather than things like heat radiation or vertical fuel ladders, the main driver of the spread is actually ember distribution and the speed with which it can burn through habitat types, especially grasslands. Unfortunately, this return interval that we're seeing is not sustainable, especially for chaparral. So next slide, please. While it's true that chaparral is adapted to wildfire, it's adapted to the historical regime. So high intensity, but low frequency. And when we have these rapid successionary fires, one generation of chaparral doesn't reach the level of maturation to produce a seed bank that begets the next generation. So this image here, this is from the Chaparral Institute and really illustrates this clearly. This was taken down in San Diego, I believe around 2005. So in the background there, you see your mature chaparral, the closed evergreen canopy. At the time this photo was taken, it's been 35 years since that burned. In the middle, a fire came through, and although it's clearly a burn scar, you see a lot of that regeneration underway. So you see the shrub saplings coming up, high diversity of species, and given enough time, that will grow up to become the chaparral you see in the background. Unfortunately, in the foreground here, a third fire came just 2 years after the second. So the shrubs, they weren't mature, they didn't produce the seed bank for the next generation. So this is a process that we call type conversion. And unfortunately, when chaparral is converted, most often it's replaced by readily ignitable non-native grasses and mustards. And unfortunately, this becomes a bit of a positive reinforcement cycle. So increased grass cover means higher fire frequency, faster spread of fires, which then of course makes it into the adjacent chaparral, and you just have this ongoing process. This is why our work with the chaparral restoration is so critical. We're really trying to counteract this process that humans have started. Now, when it comes to protecting life and property, latest science has really started to show that rather than focusing on fuels management, which has been sort of the traditional response, it's far more effective to focus in on the home and focus on the community's awareness and response to fires. So next slide, please. So MRT and Tree People were really fortunate in that we were able to participate in a technical advisory committee. It was led by our friends at the Sandmock Mountains Recreation Conservation District, and it culminated in the creation of this website, defensiblespace.org. I do not have the time or the expertise to go into all the incredible detail that's included on the site. So once we're done here, I really encourage everybody to go to this website, especially if you live in a fire zone, take a look through the resources. It's incredibly detailed, very user-friendly, and it covers everything from architectural modifications to make your home more ember-proof, down to the landscape level. What do you need to do with the property you own? This was all started because folks kept asking the fire department, what are fire-safe plants that I can use for landscaping? And the truth is, there is no fire-safe plant. All plants will burn. There are certainly some species you want to avoid more than others, but it's really about condition and maintenance and location than anything else. So again, take a look. It's an amazing resource. And I'm going to now introduce Beth Burnham. She's on several relevant boards in all this, and we're very lucky to have her here today.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you. So I'm Beth Burnham. I'm a board member of Tree People and of MRT. I'm a native Angelino. I live in Topanga Canyon, as Cindy mentioned, and I'm a founding member and co-president of the Fire Safe Council in Topanga. So this photograph looks very similar to the view from my back. I'm very fortunate. It is spectacular, but it can also look radically different. So next slide, Pete, please. So I'm on a delay on my internet, so I'm going to keep talking and hopefully you're seeing the slide because I can't yet see it. This is a photograph of my mother evacuating our home in the 1961 Bel Air fire. I was 5.5 years old, and this was my first experience with wildfire. And it was one that clearly left its mark on me. Our home survived, but many, many homes were lost on our street. So you've heard from Alyssa and Kevin about how important weather and fuel are to fire behavior. But just to summarize, in the Santa Monica Mountains, fire scientists describe our fires as weather-driven events. And they know all of our fires are started by human activities, not by natural conditions such as lightning. So 89% of our vegetation fires are put out. They're non-event. However, the few that get out of control have one thing in common: weather, red flag conditions, high wind, low humidity, and low moisture levels in living plants. And these are the classic Santa Ana. So here in the Santa Monica Mountains, we only have to worry about wildfire under specific weather conditions. And another characteristic of these wind-driven fires is that the fire front is not continuous. The keeps ahead of the wall of flames by the embers that are being carried in that wind. So next slide, please. This is a photo of a small neighborhood in Paradise, the community that was devastated by the Camp Fire in 2018. It's a great example of wildfire discontinuity. The pine forest that surrounds this community is intact, yet almost every single home in the neighborhood is burned to the ground. It's devastating. The fire was started by embers. The neighborhood never experienced the wall of flames. Once one house was on fire, the wildfire became an urban fire, and then it moved house to house. This is what typically happens. LA County Fire Department tells us that over half the homes that burn a wind-driven wildfire are ignited by embers. Others can be as high as 80 to 90%. So here we've learned important facts. Embers ignite most of the homes that burn in our wind wildfires. Once one house is on fire, the fire becomes an urban fire and all of the neighboring houses are at risk. And that embers travel long distances, even miles. Think about it, during the Woolsey fire, the 101 freeway like it wasn't there. I can't think of a better fire break than 10 lanes of concrete, yet it didn't break or stop the fire. But the good news is we can make choices that can make it possible for our homes to survive the ember storm associated with a wind-driven wildfire. Next slide, please. Fire science and insurance companies have gotten together to study home construction in an ember storm and the effect of the ember storm. In North Carolina, they built an ember lab. So just imagine a huge soundstage with a generator, an ember generator. In this picture, this photo shows two houses that they side by side in the lab, and these are full-scale, full-size houses. And you can see the embers being tossed at them, shot at the houses under the word after, if you believe. The houses demonstrate the impact of different choices. The house on the left is with wood shingles. It has wood mulch on the ground right up to the house. It's got plants to the house, and it has plastic gutters. On the right, the house is on the right is cider. It's got a non-flammable rock mulch. The plants are far away from the house, and it's got metal gutters. So in this picture, it's after 10 minutes of ember exposure. The house on the left is basically going to be on fire. The house on the right has some embers that have collected on the ground, but nothing has ignited. Next slide, please. So after a few more months, the house on the left is fully engulfed in flames. So the choices we make do make sense, and our homes can survive an ember storm. Next slide, please. So our Fire Safe Council in Topanga has a three-pronged focus. The first prong has been our Safer Roadways program. We've written grants that have funded the removal of trees. Yes, I have removed trees. And we're identified as hazardous for the evacuation of our community and the ability of firefighters to come into our community in driven wildfire events. A second prong has been our Safer Neighborhood program, where we've created education programs and have brought them to neighborhoods in Topanga and to other communities in high fire zones across the Santa Monica Mountains and into the Angeles. And then the third prong is our Safer Homes program, where we've created a program where we homes in Topanga and walk around the home with the homeowner, suggestions as to what they can do to harden their homes to embers. Next slide, please. So back to that website that Kevin spoke about, defensiblespace.org. I was honored to be a layperson on the task force putting this website together. This is an image from the website. And once again, I really highly recommend this website as the go-to place for state-of-the-art information. This summarizes how to prioritize your efforts, where to put your money and your time as you harden your home. So you want to do the low cost, high priority stuff first, and there's plenty of it to do. Maintenance is the number one item. Look at it, it's down at the lower right-hand side of the screen. Highest priority, lowest cost, but you're going to be doing it continuously. You can harden your vents to embers and you can put covers on your gutters. These are all very, very simple things to do that have the highest priority. Replacing your roof, which is the one for right-hand quadrant, a high cost item, high priority, is very important if you happen to still have a wood roof. But in Topanga, having looked at almost over 200 homes, we've never seen a wood roof. Next slide, please. So all of our actions tie together to create a sustainable fire-adapted community. What each of us does to harden our own home protects our neighbors' homes and our neighborhoods and communities. The survival of my home is not only dependent upon my actions, but also the actions of my neighbors and the actions of tree people as it restores critical wildland landscape. So this slide is one of my favorites. This is a site in the Santa Monica Mountains that tree people restored with native plants a few years before the Woolsey fire. The fire burned through the area, and yet it went around the restoration because tree people had been maintaining the site by removing the non-native grasses that burn so easily. Look at the burned ground in the foreground and the singed oaks and burned ground in the background. Yet most of the seedlings planted by tree people survived. So as a board member of Tree People, I want to thank you for joining us today and for your support of Tree People. Californians have experienced the largest fires in our history, but the experience is not a one-off situation. By acreage burned, of the 20 largest fires, 11 occurred in the last 10 years. But more critically, the top 7 fires have all occurred in the last 4 years. So people talk about climate change, but I'm going to also add in the fact that more and more of our population is living in the wildland interface. And this is where these fires start, because down here, they are all human caused. But most importantly, it leaves us wondering, is there anything we can actually do? And the answer is yes. We can harden our home, we can educate ourselves and our communities, and we can support Tree People's team of forestry, policy, and education experts who work on restoration, fire recovery, and prevention here in LA County. So thank you for joining our chat today. And please consider supporting our upcoming wildfire campaign. All gifts to this campaign will be matched by Tree People's board. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. And now we're going to move to Q&A. If anyone has a question, you can put it into the chat box and ask specifically for any of our speakers. I did get one question emailed to me, and that is it advised that residents have a pump or hose for pool water to shoot on flames? And if so, any recommendations as to brands or key features to look for? Anyone?
So I probably am the best one to answer that.
Yes.
It's interesting. So our perspective from in our Fire Safe Council is that we really want people to their home and be ready to leave their home and prepare their home so it can defend itself without relying upon someone to be there to handle a hose. However, if you do have a water supply, the first thing you ought to do is put a sign down along the roadway of your house and help lead firefighters to that source of water, because they will have pumper trucks that use to pull that water out of your pool. If you are planning to stay and defend, in which case you are in a really, really specialized subcategory of people, and I would recommend that you connect with some of the folks in Malibu. They know a lot about it, and I'm happy to connect you to them. I'm not an expert. I'm a get out of Dodge kind of gal. So can't recommend a specific pump. I can connect you to people.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. Edith asked, what additional measures do you suggest that local, regional, and state government take to keep fire-prone communities safe?
I guess, Edith, you want me to answer that too. So this is the huge question of the day. The fires are part of our natural regime. The problem is that in the Santa Monica Mountains in particular, we have fire way too often, and they're all caused by us humans. So it's all about changing our behavior and making us become fire adapted, and perhaps making some really tough choices that areas that have burned should not be rebuilt. That's a pretty controversial issue, like a highly controversial issue, because property rights are our rights, and we have a right to build on our land, we feel, but maybe that's not the right choice. And that maybe these lands should be left to be able to regenerate back to their more native state with the help of tree people's activities, which would be a more fire resilient environment. And that's a reality, is that out here in the western Santa Monica Mountains, getting fire insurance is now getting close to impossible. Really, really expensive if you can get it at all. And so that's the market is telling us that where we're living is perhaps not sustainable. So, but we can make choices. Hope that answers Edith's question.
I would also add that if they are going to allow redevelopment in those areas, that they at least really increase the restrictions on the land use in the building code, to ensure that these proper architectural changes, such as no wooden roofs, ember-proof vents, are included in the requirements for their building. And then on top of that, I don't think we're quite there yet, but potentially providing subsidies to homeowners that they can make some of these upgrades on existing structures. It's obviously, costly to replace your roof, costly to replace your siding. So if there was some program whereby the government could assist homeowners with that, I think would go much further than additional fuels management.
So for people that live in the Santa Monica Mountains, the program that we created in Topanga has actually been now transferred over to the PD, the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains. And they have and are able to provide these kind of home ignition zone evaluations where they go to your house and walk around your house with you and make suggestions to in the Santa Monica Mountains. And so that's a great resource that you will get on a sheet from a link from Court after the talk today.
Another question from Nancy we have is, how effective are rooftop sprinkler systems? Beth?
So rooftop sprinkler systems are not very effective. That would be one of the last places I would spend money. They're expensive. And the reality is that in the moment of a wildland fire, you're going to have a whole lot of wind. So any water you're spraying on is likely to be blowing someplace else. You're likely not to actually have any water because the water pressure drops to almost nothing very, very fast. And indeed, that's why fire hydrants don't have water in a wildland fire. They're designed a house fire, a single incident. So there won't be water available. Have your own source of water. And then thirdly, there won't be power to power that sprinkler system. So you need to have your own way of generating power. So I would spend money in a lot of other places first. The timing of when that water goes on becomes very important. How are you, in my view, you're not going to be around. How are you going to know when to turn it on as that fire is coming through to trying to change the environment? One suggestion that is that rather than worrying about using water during the fire, is actually on a red flag day when they happen, just super saturate right around your first 5 feet or so of the ground around your house. Your plants, if you have any plants there, which I necessarily recommend, will appreciate it, but most importantly, it will change the humidity in and around your house, and it will make it less easy for embers to ignite the house itself. So that's how I would recommend using water.
Thank you.
Do present day fires burn hotter than fires from the past?
I would say this is oftentimes associated more with coniferous forests, where we do see the buildup of fuels underneath that then lead to what's called a crown fire, where the upper canopy of the coniferous trees burns. I think there is an argument for that in coniferous forests. I don't think that really holds so much for chaparral. A lot of people are looking at just the devastation in terms of loss of property as an indicator that the fires are hotter. But again, as Beth pointed out, with these ember-driven ignitions, it's not so much about heat radiance as much as it is about the wind conditions and the embers coming in. So sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So no, I would not